How to defend against a pawn sacrifice for center control. Have you ever faced a situation in chess where your opponent sacrifices a pawn to take control of the center? It can be tricky, but knowing how to defend against it can turn the game in your favor. Let's break down some effective strategies to counter such moves. First, understanding the importance of center control is key. The center of the chessboard allows for greater mobility of your pieces. When your opponent sacrifices a pawn, they often aim to open lines for their pieces or create weaknesses in your position. Next, it is essential to identify when a pawn sacrifice is happening. Look for signs like a pawn being exchanged to open a file or diagonal for a piece. This usually indicates that your opponent is trying to establish a strong pawn center. Once you recognize the sacrifice, assess what your opponent gains from it. They might improve their piece mobility or control important squares. Understanding their compensation helps you plan your defense. Now, let's talk about defensive strategies. One of the first steps is to develop your pieces harmoniously. Make sure your pieces are well placed to defend against potential attacks. Focus on controlling key squares and lines to limit your opponent's options. Managing your pawn structure is also vital. Aim to avoid creating isolated or backward pawns, as these can become targets. Keeping a solid pawn structure helps you maintain a strong position. Counterplay is another important aspect. Look for chances to attack on the wings or create threats against your opponent. This can distract them from their central control and shift the focus of the game. When it comes to specific tactics, consider recapturing the sacrificed pawn if it makes sense. However, be cautious. Sometimes recapturing can expose your piece to an attack or weaken your pawn structure. Always weigh the risks. Creating counterplay is crucial as well. Use any open lines created by the sacrifice to your advantage. If a file opens, control it with your rooks to challenge your opponent's position. Prophylactic thinking is also a smart approach. Anticipate your opponent's plans and take steps to prevent them from executing their strategy. This could mean moving pieces to defend key squares or preparing to challenge their central control. Lastly, think about the long-term implications of the sacrifice. If your opponent has established a strong pawn center, consider how to challenge it later. A pawn break or maneuvering your pieces can be effective ways to attack those pawns. In practice, observe how experienced players handle similar situations. Studying games where players successfully defended against pawn sacrifices can provide you with practical examples to learn from. By applying these strategies, you can effectively defend against pawn sacrifices aimed at controlling the center and turn the game to your advantage.